Welcome to our February 25th edition of Gold and Black Live. And as per usual, Brian Newbert's on the move up to East Lansing for the Purdue Michigan State game tomorrow. Big game for the Boilermakers at noon Eastern time at the Breslin Center. Tom Dienhart joins us, and we'll talk a little, obviously, basketball on the front end and where Purdue sits in the Big Ten race, which is in a good spot, and also the start of spring football practice with Tom. Today, also on the show, we will have Steve Lavin, college basketball analyst. He'll join us in addition to Corey Palm. We'll talk about his new book, 11 Warriors, and interesting story about the 1943 Purdue football team and that story as well. I want to thank our sponsor, Triple X, on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929. Hilton Garden Inn, when tomorrow's a big day. State HDI tonight, and State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. Brian, I'm not sure where you are exactly, but you're somewhere between West Lafayette and East Lansing. But Purdue's got, based on Ohio State's win over Illinois, tomorrow could be a big day for Purdue in terms of the Big Ten race. Wisconsin also goes to Rutgers after the Purdue-Michigan State game. Still think Purdue's in a good spot, but what say you as you look ahead to the Michigan State game tomorrow?
Yeah, for security purposes, I can't disclose my location.
Okay.
I think that, for Purdue, the disadvantage of what they went through in that 8-game span over 21 days or whatever it was, the disadvantage of that now becomes kind of an advantage here, where you just had your bye week at a point in the season where you probably couldn't script it any better, because you have these 3 regular season games left with a Big Ten title hanging in the balance. I would expect Purdue to come out with energy. I would expect them to be refreshed. I think it's easy to assume that. Whereas this Big Ten season has kind of shown us, as much as any other, that every game is like a season unto itself. So you never know what the hell is going to happen. But I would expect Purdue to, come out and play well tomorrow. I don't know where Michigan State is right now. They seem to be cratering. We've said that about Michigan State before. And they come out and they have that consummate, Tom Izzo game where they just shock you. But I think when you look at their schedule was so front loaded with manageable games that this might not be them falling off. This might just be them getting exposed by the fact that their schedule was backloaded with all their more difficult games. This is not a typical Michigan State team. They don't have any stars. They don't have an all Big Ten player on this team, I don't think. They don't have a top 25 scorer in the Big Ten. How many times have we said something like that over the years? Never. So I think that, if Purdue comes out and plays well, they are the head and shoulders more talented team, I think, between these two. And they should be okay. But Michigan State can really shoot, and they can really shoot from a lot of different positions. And you really want to be diligent, if you're Purdue, about making sure that you don't let them, get hot, and then for that crowd to get involved and things like that, because this is one of those rare opportunities where you're going to a place like Michigan State, you're the overwhelming favorite, and all the pressure's on you. So I expect Purdue to play well. Purdue has to play well. And it's kind of all out there in front of Purdue right now. If they close the season strong, they're going to be Big Ten champions. They're going to be a high number 2 seed, probably, maybe even a number 1, depending on how things shake out. And I just don't think that bye week could have come at a better time.
Yeah. Tom, you look at that in the Big Ten race, and we watched Illinois really get pounded until the end, until they lost that, or till Ohio State kind of gave up a double-digit lead. But the Big Ten race is an interesting thing, because you got Rutgers going Wisconsin going to Rutgers tomorrow. Illinois has to go to Michigan. It's just been really been a knockdown, drag out fight. And as Brian has said, that this is not, there are no easy nights, and there are no easy games for Purdue historically, with a very rare exception up at Michigan State.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Some tough hurdles to clear for all those contenders, right? And of course, the Buckeyes certainly did Wisconsin and Purdue a lot of favors by hanging on and winning in Champaign. And very impressive victory So yeah, that really puts the Illini behind the eight ball, so to speak. And here we are, like you said, sort of sets up with the Wisconsin Purdue showdown, if you will. And you know, if you're Purdue, you gotta like your situation, right? You control your own destiny to win an outright Big Ten title, and those don't come along too often. And you know, Brian laid out the hurdles and the potential pitfalls in East Lansing, a dangerous Spartan team. A Spartan team that's really struggled of late. That's well documented. A Spartan team whose resume certainly could use the boost by knocking off a highly ranked team like Purdue. So they're going to certainly be very motivated, and it's going to be a heck of a crazy environment. I love those noon Saturday afternoon Big Ten games in the wintertime. It's a lot of fun, and that's going to be a heck of an environment up there, and the stakes being so high for both these teams.
Yeah, Michigan State, I don't like them when their backs are against the wall and they lose by 26 to Iowa.
But I don't think this is that team. You know, I don't think they have that sort of that sort of toughness, that sort of leadership. This is not a typical Michigan State team. You know, I don't think.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, right, but that's what this comes down to is, you know, we aren't sitting here saying, you know, I fully expect to get the best of Cassius Winston or the best
true.
of Mateen Cleaves or the best of Jason Richardson or the best of whoever. You're not looking at this like, how the hell is Purdue going to score over Xavier Tillman? You're looking at a bunch of randos here that, of course, Purdue's been killed by randos before this season. So I just don't know if this Michigan State team has the core elements of that consummate Michigan State, you know, circle the wagons type of moment. Purdue's won 4 straight in this series. You know, they've had more success probably at the Breslin Center than just about anybody. It's going to be the unknown that gets you tomorrow if something gets you. But like I said, that's been the nature of this Big Ten season. I don't think anybody would have said, you know, Robert Finney's going to get 20 points against Purdue and they're going to win with Trace Jackson Davis doing nothing. That's kind of the nature of the beast here in this Big Ten season.
I mean, Wisconsin came that close losing Minnesota this week.
Yeah,
that's the thing for Purdue
Minnesota
is
team,
that
right?
this, from Purdue's perspective, this is down to one team. The only team that stands in their way of winning a Big Ten title really is Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has been surviving, you know, by the skin of its teeth. To Wisconsin's credit, they have done what Purdue, you know, hasn't always been able to do. Now, Purdue's obviously, you know, they hung on against Ohio State, they hung on against Maryland, but had Purdue been able to do that, you know, 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, you don't lose at Rutgers, you don't lose at Indiana, and all of a sudden, you know, this is all a moot point. Purdue's already got the title wrapped up. But to Wisconsin's credit, they just keep finding a way. You know, they aren't the best team in the country. They aren't the most talented team in the Big Ten by a long shot, but they keep doing what Wisconsin does. They just kind of find ways to win. And when the games get close at the end, sometimes there's situations where they shouldn't be close, like at Minnesota, but nevertheless, Wisconsin tends to find a way.
Yeah, Minnesota shot the ball well, like it did against Purdue for much of its game too, against Wisconsin, but at least for to keep that game close. So that, and it was a 1-point game, but it was 4. They hit a 3 literally at the buzzer to cut it to 1 with that win. Brian, when you look now at you know, the rest of the race and what's left for Purdue, you talk about Wisconsin being the only team to sit in front of Purdue, but Purdue only maybe the only team that sits in front of Purdue. And I'm not making the comment that the Boilermakers don't give great effort, but Matt Painter talked yesterday about the need to keep those turnovers down. Everybody wants to talk about Purdue's Ken Palm rating defensively and that correlation that Painter makes about turnovers and defense. How do you view that in terms of, is this defense good enough to win in deep in March, or is this an overblown stat as much as we all love Ken Palm? How do you take all of this and put it in your mind when evaluating Purdue's chances?
Purdue's defense is only as good as its matchups, and Purdue's defense is only as good as its 3-point shooting. If Purdue is scoring and not turning the ball over, I think their defense is good enough to win with. If they're not making threes, and they have to win a game at that end of the floor, and they have a bad matchup, you know, that's kind of your your proverbial perfect storm there. I think that Purdue plays away, playing as big as Purdue plays, there's always going to be situations where there
Yeah.
are going to be matchups out there you're worried about. And I think that's the nature of the NCAA tournament anyway, for everybody, for most everybody, I should say. There's no perfect defensive team that doesn't have some sort of vulnerability from a defensive perspective. But I also think that Purdue's getting better defensively. I think the last couple of games they've been fine. I mean, I don't know if they've gotten the credit for it necessarily, but you did a good job against Rutgers on Geo Baker and Ron Harper. I don't know if Ron Harper was 100% healthy, but he sure looked 100% healthy at Michigan the other day, because he was doing the stuff he wasn't doing at Purdue. He was backing people down. He was shooting turnarounds and stuff like that. But Purdue has, struggled at times to contain high scoring guards, or in some cases below average Big Ten players who just happen to be high scoring guards on that particular night. I think they did a good job on Boo Buie at Northwestern after Fats Russell got him. And then they did a good job on both Geo Baker and Ron Harper against Rutgers. I thought that was a really good sign. I thought the fact that Purdue beat Maryland's not good. So let's not pretend like beating Maryland was them beating, Duke or whatever. But the fact that they had to win a game, whatever that score was, 61-60 or 62-61, whatever it was, the fact Purdue had to win that game and got it done, I thought was a pretty good sign. And they did a good job thereafter from a defensive perspective. I think they're trending well. I think what they needed this week was just some me time, just some time to just go back to basics and just let's shore some stuff up here. Let's really put some thought into the importance of defense here. And that's what Purdue typically gets at the end of the non-conference season, where they get a couple of days of practice, and Painter's teams typically have taken off around that time. I think this was a really unique opportunity for Purdue in that sense, but also they were trending pretty well defensively anyway.
Tom, speaking of me time or Tom time, it is now spring football time. So you'll be camped in front of what 4 open practices, what was it, 4 or 5 to start. It starts on Monday. And really some interesting news last night with Marty Biagi moving on to Ole Miss. Not that that's shocking in terms of location. He's obviously a guy that's home around the Delta, so to speak. But does that add to the storyline as you go into spring ball and look at this beginning of the 2022 season with the first of 15 practices on Monday?
Yeah, not ideal timing, obviously. A bit of a surprise. I think nobody really anticipated Biagi leaving, but that's the reality. He's out the door. Purdue's going to have to just patchwork their special teams practicing among all the coaches this spring, obviously. And then Brom will have to hire somebody in April or May here. Probably start fishing through potential candidates this month when he has time. So yeah, Marty brought a lot to the table from a recruiting standpoint, especially. I think his ability to cultivate that pipeline, if you will, to Louisiana was pretty well documented. Got some pretty good recruits out of there the last couple of years. Of course, the big 2023 commit, the only verbal commit so far in that class, is a Marty Biagi guy, Ricky Collins, a 4-star quarterback. So yeah, they're going to miss him probably more from a recruiting standpoint. Now, special teams wise, guys, he was here for 2 years, and let's be honest, it was a bit of an uneven experience on the field. Last year was better than 2020. Of course, 2020, a lot of things were out of whack with COVID and the pandemic and full steam. But I think the special teams did get better last year. Of course, the kicking was outstanding. Not the coverage teams were good too. So by and large, I think he did a solid job on the field. So the pages turned. Now this will be Jeff Brom's, I believe, 5th special teams coach in what will be his 6th season since being the Purdue head coach. And this will be the 5th new hire to the staff coming into 2022 as well. So the turnover has been a consistent theme almost yearly. And here we go again. That doesn't mean it's bad news. If there's anything Jeff Brom has proven, he can hire people and I guess for if you will, the train keeps moving forward. So Here's another hire he's got to make. And like I said, that'll happen later this spring. But yeah, Alan, February 28th, the first practice, 4 practices are open. Spring game is April 9th at noon Eastern time on BTN. And there are plenty of storylines. I've set everything up pretty well, I think, heading into spring drills if people have been following on the site. And again, I'll obviously have a lot more content moving forward here the next month or so.
Brian, you had a chance to talk to Mike Babinski as we kind of put a close to the segment, but I wanted to get your vibe. Just the vibe. Mike is always interesting to talk to, but he talked to him earlier this week. He had some initial stuff, but some additional stories. One of the big storylines, obviously, is renovation or additions to Ross-Age Stadium. Just what was a couple quick takeaways from your conversation with Mike, and as he turns the page and looks towards 2022-23 academic athletic year?
Yeah, the stadium's happening. I mean, it's you know, COVID just kind of delayed it. It didn't stop it, and I'm a little bit surprised how quickly things returned back to normal.
Yeah.
There was no, blast radius for all of those financial ramifications from the pandemic. The stadium's back on, and that's gonna start here in some form soon. Mike Babinski's going to take to the trustees in April his proposal for what he wants to do as part of the first phase of this. It's going to cost $30 million. I think the one thing that's obviously going to be part of it, and he didn't necessarily say this overtly, but this is one of the concepts that's at the forefront of his mind, is the tunnel from the locker room to the stadium, which I think makes so much sense, because I think it is so awkward that the team has to walk through the crowd after games. Also, I mean, as tumultuous as sometimes fan and athlete interactions can get these days, I think it's only a matter of time before something happens that would be regrettable.
Yeah.
But I think that's the part of it that's absolutely positively going to be part of this. That's just my read on it. He didn't come out. Obviously, he shouldn't be telling me what they're going to do before he proposes it to the trustees. But I think in so many words, that's part of it. I think it's really important for Purdue to do a nutrition area, a dining area for the, I don't know if it would just be the football team or for the whole athletic department, but what Purdue's got going on now for the football team, at least, seems a little bit clunky. I think they're in the J9 club, or at least they were. I don't know if they're still there. Over at Mackey Arena. So I think that's going to happen. That's going to be on the north end of the stadium where the team store is right now. And then the other part of it is just the potential for some additional seating there in the south end zone, whether that means closing it off or just adding seating. I don't know. But that's obviously something that's going to be dealt with at some point. Whether or not it's part of phase one or not, I don't know. But this is going to happen. And this is going to happen before the pandemic really is even over. The financial ramifications, I think, are over. And that was my original reason to go talk to Mike, was because I want to do a big kind of post-mortem, for lack of a better term, on the financial part of the whole guiding an athletic department through a pandemic type of thing. And Purdue seems to be, to hear him tell it, back on solid ground. Like, I don't want to say like it never happened, but obviously it did happen. Obviously Purdue's a little bit of a thinner operation than it was before, but they're pretty close to being right back where they started.
Yeah, $17 million in the hole. They've raised the money to cover that, and to their credit, to have been able to keep this, keep it rolling.
The deficit ended up only being, if I recall correctly, I've got the financial reports, I read through them. I believe the deficit was only $8 million for 2020, 2021, that's a lot of money, but as opposed to the 50, 60 million that, you were worried about going into this thing, that's a pretty big deal. That's a hell of a success story.
Yeah. And one that will pay dividends in terms of the health of the department if they can continue to put people in Ross-Age Stadium. And I would think that's going to happen next year at the least. So guys, thank you. And we're going to jump to take a short break here and come back with our next segment. And we appreciate, we'll have more on the site. Also, stay tuned for our Saturday conversation, which will be on Sunday, actually, on the site as well. And all of Brian's coverage from Purdue, Michigan State, and Tom's coverage of spring football as well. So we'll take a 2-minute break. We'll be back with the next segment
From
on
the
Golden
set of
Black
three's
Live.
company.
Yeah, there you go.